A desperate tiger risks everything, seeking help from a soldier. Against all odds, trust is formed, and an unthinkable battle for survival begins. What happens next will leave you breathless, because some bonds defy nature itself. Before we continue, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more incredible stories like this to life. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. If you love heartwarming and thought-provoking stories about the bond between humans and nature, this is the place for you. Now, let's dive back into this unforgettable story. The wind howled through the military base in the remote Alaskan wilderness, carrying with it the scent of pine and ice. The night was dark, cold, and eerily quiet, until Sergeant Daniel Hayes heard it. A low, guttural growl. His muscles tensed as he froze mid-step, his fingers tightening around the rifle slung across his chest. His breath puffed out in small clouds, but he wasn't cold anymore. He was alert. Something was watching him. He turned his gaze toward the perimeter fence, scanning the tree line beyond. Then he saw it. A shadow moved between the trees, large and powerful. His pulse quickened as the figure stepped into the dim glow of the base's security lights. It was a tiger. Hayes blinked. He had seen plenty of wildlife in Alaska, bears, wolves, even the occasional moose. But a tiger? That made no sense. Tigers didn't belong here. And yet, this one stood before him, its orange and black fur rippling under the flickering lights, muscles coiled beneath its thick coat. But it wasn't prowling. It wasn't hunting. It was waiting. Hayes didn't move. He barely even breathed as the tiger locked eyes with him. He had spent years in the military, trained to recognize threats in all forms. But this was something different. Then, to his utter disbelief, the tiger did something no wild predator should ever do. It lowered its head. Not in aggression. Not in preparation to pounce. It was bowing. As if it was pleading. The hair on the back of Hayes' neck stood up. Tigers didn't ask for help. But this one was desperate. Something was terribly wrong. And Sergeant Hayes was about to find out what. Hayes kept his rifle steady, but he didn't raise it. The tiger wasn't attacking, wasn't snarling, wasn't acting like the fierce predator it should be. Instead, it stood still, ears pinned back, eyes filled with something strange. Fear. Behind him, the floodlights from the base illuminated the clearing, and he could hear the footsteps of other soldiers approaching. "Sergeant! What's going on?" Corporal Jennings called out, rifle at the ready. "Hold your fire," Hayes said, keeping his voice firm but quiet. "It's not attacking." Jennings frowned but obeyed, eyes darting between Hayes and the tiger. More soldiers arrived, their weapons aimed at the animal. The tiger let out a soft, rumbling sound, almost a whimper. Hayes got twisted. "Something's wrong," he muttered. The tiger turned its head slightly, glancing toward the thick forest behind it. Then it looked back at him, huffed, and took a slow step backward. "Is it trying to get us to follow?" one of the soldiers whispered. Hayes clenched his jaw. His instincts screamed that this wasn't a trap. If the tiger had wanted to attack, it would have done so already. Instead, it was waiting. Pleading. Hayes made a decision. "I'm going after it." The soldiers exchanged shocked glances. "Sir, that's crazy," Jennings protested. "It's a tiger." "I know what it is," Hayes said. "And I also know what I see." He looked Jennings dead in the eye. "That tiger needs help." Without another word, Hayes stepped forward. And the tiger turned, leading him into the darkness. The icy wind bit at Hayes' skin as he followed the tiger into the dense forest, his breath coming in steady puffs. Behind him, Jennings and 3 other soldiers trailed cautiously, their weapons raised, ready for anything. The tiger moved swiftly but didn't run. It glanced back every few steps as if making sure they were still following. Hayes had no idea what he was walking into. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The further they went, the thicker the trees became, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Then the tiger stopped. A deep, rumbling growl escaped its throat, but it wasn't directed at them. It was looking ahead. Hayes followed its gaze, and felt his stomach drop. A dark hole yawned before them, an abandoned mining shaft, its jagged entrance surrounded by broken rocks and frozen dirt. The earth had caved in around it, creating an unstable slope that led down into complete darkness. Then, from inside the shaft, a weak, desperate cry. Hayes' heart pounded. There was something down there. Something small. The tiger let out a pained chuff and stepped forward, but the ground crumbled beneath its paws. It recoiled, pacing anxiously at the edge. Then Hayes understood. It wasn't just any tiger. It was a mother. And her cubs were trapped. The sound came again, faint, weak, but unmistakable. A cub's cry. Hayes swallowed hard. He could barely see anything in the pit's darkness, but the noise sent a chill down his spine. The cubs were alive, for now. The mother tiger paced at the edge of the shaft, her powerful muscles rippling under her thick fur. She huffed, nudging at the crumbling ground, desperate to reach her young. "Holy hell," Jennings muttered, stepping beside Hayes. "We've got trapped cubs?" Hayes nodded. "And we don't have much time." The mining shaft was old, its entrance partially collapsed. One wrong step could send more earth tumbling down, burying the cubs alive. Hayes turned to his team. "We need a plan." Jennings frowned. "Sir, with all due respect, these are wild animals. It's not our job to rescue them." The tiger let out a deep, guttural sound, a sound so filled with despair that even Jennings flinched. Hayes looked back at the pit. "They're trapped. If we don't help, they die." There was a long silence. Then Private Reynolds, one of the younger soldiers, sighed. "So, how do we get them out?" Hayes exhaled sharply. "We go in." The mother tiger stopped pacing. She stared at him, her golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. She understood. And she was waiting. The soldiers worked quickly, securing a rope to a sturdy tree nearby. Hayes fastened the harness around his waist, testing the grip. "You sure about this, Sarge?" Jennings asked. "I've climbed worse," Hayes muttered. He wasn't exactly trained for tiger rescues, but he'd been in enough war zones to know that sometimes, you didn't ask questions. You just acted. The tiger watched him closely, her ears twitching as he edged toward the pit. "I'll go first," Hayes said. "Lower me down slow." The rope tightened as he took his first step off the edge. The dirt crumbled beneath his boots, and the drop below seemed endless. His flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Then, movement. He saw them. Two tiny cubs, huddled together, their fur damp and covered in dirt. One whimpered, barely moving. The other lifted its head weakly. "They're alive," Hayes called up. "But they're not in good shape." Above him, the mother tiger let out a long, throaty chuff, a sound of relief. But the mission was far from over. Because something wasn't right. The walls of the shaft trembled. The ground beneath his boots shifted. The pit was collapsing. And he was running out of time. The moment Hayes grabbed the first cub, the dirt beneath him gave way. "Rope! Now!" he yelled. Jennings and Reynolds pulled hard, yanking him back just as the ground caved in completely. A deafening crash echoed through the pit as rocks and debris tumbled into the darkness. Dust filled the air, making Hayes cough. His heart pounded as he looked down. The second cub. His stomach twisted. The other cub was still down there. And it wasn't moving. "No, no, no," Hayes muttered. He cradled the first cub against his chest, feeling its tiny body tremble. Above, the mother tiger growled, pacing wildly, her eyes wide with panic. "We need to get that other cub," Hayes said, voice tight. Jennings shook his head. "That whole place is unstable. If you go back down, you might not come out." Hayes' jaw clenched. His gaze drifted back to the mother tiger. She was staring at him. Waiting. Trusting. He exhaled sharply. Then I guess I better move fast. Hayes tightened his grip on the rope. The mother tiger let out another low chuff, watching his every move. He had never seen an animal act this way before, so patient, so full of trust. I'm going back down, he said. Jennings cursed. Sarge, this is insane. Then call me crazy, Hayes shot back. But I'm not leaving that cub. Without waiting for an argument, he secured the rope and descended again, heart hammering. The dust settled. The second cub was barely breathing, half buried in loose dirt. Hayes dropped to his knees and carefully dug it out. The tiny creature was lighter than he expected, its ribs faintly visible beneath its striped fur. It was still alive. But just barely. Hayes pressed the cub against his chest, shielding it as he shouted up. Pull me up. The rope tightened. The walls trembled. He held the cub tightly as the soldiers hauled him toward safety. And then, with one final heave, he was out. The mother tiger took a cautious step forward, her golden eyes locked onto her cubs. Hayes slowly knelt and set them down. The mother tiger sniffed them, then let out a soft, rumbling sound, a sound of relief, of gratitude. For a long moment, she simply looked at Hayes. Then she did something he would never forget. She bowed her head. And Hayes knew, this wasn't just an animal. This was a mother. And she had trusted him with everything. The two cubs lay curled up beside their mother, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. The mother tiger sat motionless, watching over them, her powerful muscles still tense from the ordeal. Sergeant Hayes knelt a few feet away, breathing heavily. His hands were covered in dirt, his uniform torn, but he didn't care. The moment the mother tiger lowered her head to gently lick her cubs, something inside him shifted. That was insane, Jennings muttered, still gripping his rifle. You realize you just risked your life for a bunch of tigers, right? Hayes barely heard him. His gaze was locked on the mother tiger, who had now turned her piercing golden eyes toward him. She stepped forward. The soldiers stiffened, fingers hovering over their triggers. But Hayes raised a hand, signaling them to stand down. The tiger stopped just inches away from him. For a moment, neither moved. Then, to everyone's shock, she did something no one expected. She nudged her massive head against Hayes' shoulder. A silent thank you. Jennings let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. The tiger pulled back, watching Hayes carefully. Then, with a final glance at her cubs, she looked toward the forest. She was ready to leave. But something about her hesitation told Hayes this wasn't the last time they would see her. And he was right. The soldiers returned to base, shaken but unharmed. The official report was hard to explain, an encounter with a wild animal didn't exactly cover it. But Hayes knew the truth. The mother tiger had trusted them. And she wasn't just any tiger. She was something more. Days passed, then a week. The forest was quiet. The tiger was gone. Until she came back. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, a familiar shape appeared just beyond the fence. The soldiers froze. It's her, Jennings whispered. The mother tiger stood tall, her cubs now stronger, their eyes bright. She wasn't here for food. She wasn't lost. She had come back for a reason. And Hayes had a sinking feeling that whatever it was, it wouldn't be good. The mother tiger paced near the tree line, her tail flicking anxiously. The cubs stayed close, their ears twitching. Something was wrong. Hayes stepped forward cautiously, lowering his weapon. The tiger's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, he saw something beyond recognition. Fear. What's out there? Hayes muttered. Then, as if answering his question, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Gunfire. Jennings snapped his rifle up. That wasn't one of ours. Hayes' stomach twisted. Poachers. The tiger growled, her ears flattening. She knew the danger lurking in the shadows. She had come to them, for help. And this time, it wasn't just about her cubs. It was about survival. The soldiers moved swiftly, their training kicking in. Hayes, Jennings, and 2 others advanced toward the sound of gunfire, staying low. The tiger moved with them. It should have been impossible, soldiers and a predator working side by side, but somehow, it felt right. Then they saw them. 3 men in camouflage stood near a tree, rifles in hand. One of them knelt beside a dead deer, blood pooling beneath it. But it wasn't the deer that made Hayes' skin crawl. It was the cage behind them. Empty. They weren't here to hunt. They were here to capture. The tiger let out a low growl, baring her fangs. And just like that, the hunt had changed. Because now, they were the prey. The poachers didn't see it coming. Before they could react, the tiger charged. One man barely had time to turn before the massive beast barreled into him, knocking him to the ground. His rifle skidded across the dirt. "Drop your weapons," Hayes shouted, raising his gun. The other 2 men scrambled for cover, but Jennings and the others were faster. They fired warning shots, forcing the poachers to freeze. The tiger stood over the fallen man, her lips curled in a snarl. But she didn't kill him. She was giving them the choice. Jennings kicked the rifles away. "I'd surrender if I were you." The poachers didn't argue. But something told Hayes this wasn't over. Because men like them? They always came back. The poachers were taken into custody, but their capture didn't bring relief. If there were 3, there were more. And now, the tiger and her cubs were targets. "She can't stay here," Hayes muttered. "They'll come looking for her." Jennings sighed. "And we can't exactly put her in witness protection." Hayes stared into the forest, his gut twisting. There was only one way to keep her safe. They had to take her somewhere they couldn't follow. But that meant leading her deeper into the wild. And into even greater danger. The night was colder than usual as Sergeant Hayes and his team prepared for their mission. They had no maps, no solid plan, just one goal. Get the tiger and her cubs as far away from human threat as possible. The poachers had been arrested, but Hayes knew better. Where there were 3, there were more. And if these men had been hunting this tiger, they wouldn't stop now. The mother tiger paced anxiously as if sensing the weight of the decision. Her cubs, now stronger, huddled beside her, their small eyes flicking between the soldiers. "We have to move now," Hayes muttered. "Before more of them come." Jennings adjusted his rifle. "And where exactly are we taking them?" Hayes exhaled, watching the vast darkness of the Alaskan wilderness. "Somewhere they can disappear." With a final glance back at the base, the safety they were leaving behind, Hayes turned and led the way into the unknown. The tiger followed. And the hunt began. The deeper they went, the more Hayes felt it, something wasn't right. The trees pressed in on all sides, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. The wind howled, but beneath it was something else. Footsteps. Jennings heard it too. "We're being followed." Hayes cursed under his breath. He tightened his grip on his rifle, eyes scanning the trees. The tiger's ears twitched, and she let out a low, warning growl. Then, a sharp snap. A flash of movement. "Down!" Hayes shouted. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the trees. The poachers had found them. And this time, they weren't taking prisoners. Chaos. The soldiers hit the ground, returning fire as the poachers moved in from all sides. They weren't just hunters. They were trained. Organized. A bullet whizzed past Hayes' head, striking a tree. "Jennings, get to cover." The mother tiger snarled, her massive body shielding her cubs. But she was outnumbered. Hayes knew they couldn't win this fight. "Fall back," he yelled. The soldiers moved fast, weaving through the trees, using the darkness to their advantage. But the poachers weren't backing down. A trap had been set. And they had walked right into it. They ran until their lungs burned, until the gunfire faded behind them. But even as they stopped to catch their breath, Hayes knew something was wrong. Reynolds was missing. "Where the hell is Reynolds?" Jennings panted. Then, a scream. They turned just in time to see him, a figure in the moonlight, held at gunpoint by a man in camouflage. One of the poachers. But it wasn't just any poacher. It was someone they recognized. Reynolds' expression was twisted with guilt. Because he hadn't been captured. He had betrayed them. "Drop your weapons," the lead poacher ordered. The soldiers hesitated, but Reynolds pressed the barrel of his rifle against Hayes' back. "Do it," he said quietly. Jennings cursed but obeyed, tossing his gun to the ground. Hayes followed. The mother tiger stood nearby, her growl deep and threatening. But she didn't move. She was outnumbered. The poacher smirked. "Smart choice." He turned to Reynolds. "You did well." Hayes clenched his fists. "Why?" Reynolds hesitated. "They offered me a deal. They said they'd let us walk if I helped them take the tiger." Jennings spat on the ground. "And you believe them?" The poacher laughed. "Oh, we'll let you walk." He lifted his rifle. "Just not alive." Then he pulled the trigger. And the world exploded. Before the bullet could hit, a blur of orange and black streaked through the air. The tiger. She moved faster than Hayes had ever seen, slamming into the poacher with bone-crushing force. The man screamed as her jaws clamped around his shoulder. Gunfire erupted again. Jennings lunged for his rifle. Hayes tackled Reynolds to the ground, rage burning in his veins. "You sold us out," he growled. Reynolds struggled, but Hayes slammed his fist into his face, knocking him out cold. The tiger roared, her eyes wild with fury. The poachers, realizing they were losing control, scattered into the trees. And just like that, the battle was over. But Hayes knew it wasn't the end. Not yet. The forest was silent once more, but the tension remained. Hayes turned to the tiger. Her fur was streaked with blood, none of it hers. Her cubs huddled close, their tiny bodies shaking. She had protected them. She had protected him. Jennings kicked at the unconscious form of Reynolds. "What do we do with him?" Hayes exhaled. "We take him back. Let command deal with him." "And the tiger?" Hayes looked at her. She stared back. She had saved his life. He owed her the same. She goes free. Jennings didn't argue. Because they both knew she had earned it. Dawn broke over the trees as the soldiers returned to base. The mother tiger followed at a distance, her golden eyes never leaving Hayes. When they reached the clearing, she stopped. This was it. Hayes turned to face her. "You saved us." She blinked slowly, her tail swaying. Then, to his shock, she stepped forward and pressed her massive head against his chest. "A farewell. A thank you." And then, with one final glance, she turned and disappeared into the trees. Hayes watched until she was gone. Until all that remained was silence. And the memory of the tiger who had trusted a soldier with her life. The report was classified. The official story was simple: poachers eliminated, mission success. But the truth? The truth became a legend. Soldiers whispered of a tiger that had fought alongside men. Of a creature who had shown loyalty, trust, and something beyond instinct. Hayes never spoke of her again. But sometimes, late at night, he would hear it. A low, distant chuff in the wind. And he knew. Somewhere out there, in the heart of the wild. She remembered him too. The bond between man and beast is often thought to be impossible, but sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, trust is born in the face of danger. Sergeant Hayes and his team set out to protect a tiger and her cubs, but in the end, it was the tiger who protected them. This story is a reminder that bravery is not just about fighting battles, it's about knowing when to stand together, no matter how different we are. The tiger trusted a soldier, and in return, the soldier chose to stand by her side. In a world where survival often means choosing who to trust, this was a moment where trust saved lives. Though they parted ways, their connection remained, proof that even the wildest of creatures can recognize kindness. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Your support helps bring more powerful and inspiring stories to life.